Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we'll be taking a look at Neoclassical Geek Revival. This is the second edition, basic rulebook, put out by Zarkov Kowalski. Now I should point out right at the beginning that this is a sponsored review, sponsored by Zarkov, helping to promote his new Kickstarter for this book, for the basic rulebook. Links will be down in the description below. However, I will of course be giving it my standard review, where I will be giving you what I see as the pluses and minuses, and we'll look through the whole book to help you decide whether it is the right book for you. Now, the Neoclassical Geek Revival rule set has been around for quite some time and seen a lot of playtesting and a lot of revisions. This one is basically a somewhat arbitrary cutting off point, where Zarkov has decided it is the second edition. Zarkov, of course, is the author of a number of OSR adventures that are quite famous, including things like Scenic Dunsmith and his big adventure collection that I looked at some time ago. All right, let's take a look at what we get inside here. It's a 120-page book, soft cover. It is, I believe, print on demand. And there is a lot of tweaks that went into this system versus a standard OSR rule set. So this is definitely not straight up OSR compatible. You're going to need to change a number of things. Your main ability scores are not quite the same. There's a lot of tweaks to the rules and a lot of really creative decisions in terms of how the rules are interpreted, in terms of how you get that old style fantasy adventure feel without being wedded to those original rules. A lot of creativity here in terms of design. Right at the beginning, we have some house rules for rolling the dice. You can use these or not use these. There's a lot of different subsystems all throughout this book. There's a lot of procedures. So whereas I'd say in modern OSR rule sets, you see a lot of minimalism, kind of a lot of hand waving, where it's more up to the DM to decide how things work out. This definitely goes off in a different direction, and I think fills a niche that would satisfy game masters that want a more procedural, a more fully worked out system for how a lot of these things are going to play out in the game. We have dice steps, which come up sometimes. We have the known rule. So there's a large number of rules in here. And in the end, it is not likely someone will have them all memorized. Basically, you only use rules that you remember. And you can look them up later if you need to. Character creation. So one of the principles here is that he uses a system that he calls Schrodinger's character creation, where you're going to be building your character as you play your first session. So this reminds me in a lot of ways of the funnel that we see in things like Dungeon Crawl Classics, where you have 4 really weak characters, then 1 survives and you flesh that guy out. However, in this case, on your very first adventure, for example, like what items that you're carrying aren't necessarily going to be known. You can just kind of pull them out as you need them. And then by the end of the first adventure, your character is now set. That's just who they are. So this allows you to start making a character really fast and jump in, and then get them fleshed out over the course of the adventure, and then feel like you can go on from there. It gets people into the game a bit faster. What we see over here is that you have attribute modifiers and dice. So you have ability scores, which go from 1 through 20. You have modifiers attached to that from -3 to +3. And there's also dice attached to that. So all of these are used for different purposes depending on the type of mechanic that you might have. There's a lot of just like these little subsystems in there, which feels kind of fiddly at first, but you can tell that a lot of playtesting has gone into this. Sometimes there are situations where having a particular die attached to a score just makes a system easier, or having a small modifier, or having the large impact of your score. So these are going to come into play in different ways. These are all laid out over here. Your basic attributes are strength, and then agility, will, charisma, health, intelligence, and perception. You also have a luck score, which essentially works like hit points. It absorbs bad luck until that runs out, and then it starts hitting your attributes. So for example, we have strength here. The score is used for one thing. So the score is the maximum damage taken limit. So this is kind of like your meat points, your strength score. It determines your encumbrance, your starting inventory. The modifier over here is used for your bonus damage for melee. And the die here can be used for stun attacks. That's going to be in the advanced book, which is going to be a separate book that's going to come out later this year, is I believe the idea. And things like your agility, your score is used for your maximum suspicion limit. So that's interesting, suspicion limit. There is a mini game here for doing stealth and players trying to detect you, and this stealth limit going up and down as players get closer to finding you. And there's also, of course, a mini game for social combat, which is a bit unusual for a OSR game. But all of these things are given mechanics so that you players have a little bit more control over how they play out. And the modifier is used for bonus to combat, trying to hit things, use your agility, and the die is used for your initiative die. We'll look into that later on because this is very different than typical initiative in OSR games. Initiative is very important and very tactical. We have your will, which is used for maximum stress. So that deals with how much you can cast when you're casting magic. The modifier can be a bonus to faith. The die isn't used for anything. Charisma, the score isn't used for anything, but the modifier is a bonus to presence, so for social combat. And the die is used for luck points regained with the party, so you can regenerate your luck, which again is like your hit points. Your health is your healing, and the maximum poison and illness limit. Modifiers and dice aren't really used. He claims that in this system, all of your different ability scores are going to be very useful, and that you can try and do a dump stat, but things like illness will hit you. There are diseases in this game, and there are mechanics that inflict illness when you don't play them correctly. Intelligence gives you starting skill points, so you can choose skills or backgrounds to give you bonuses in certain situations. The modifier is bonus to occult, and the die is used for scoring influence in social conflicts. So it's sort of like how much damage you do in social conflicts. You can also use it as an initiative die. So you can roll it to see who goes first because you are sitting and studying the situations. However, there's other factors that tie into that choice of choosing intelligence instead of agility. And then for perception, we have the bonus is damage for missile attacks because you're more accurate. If you're more perceptive, you can hit things more easily. And it's a bonus to stealth, and the die is used for accruing suspicion in stealth conflicts if you're trying to detect someone else. We have your general species here. Mankind, dwarves, elves. It's pretty much what you would expect. There's some little tweaks here. For example, dwarves don't age unless they're in the sunlight. So as long as they stay underground for long periods of time, then they are going to essentially be immortal. Elves don't eat meat and can live, of course, for a very long time. You can perhaps play an undead character. That's an option. The wee folk, that could be anything like hobbits or gnomes or other small creatures. Woodwoses are giant-like creatures. They use a size modifier system, which can radically increase or decrease effects depending on what you're doing. Because if you're a size modifier higher, you're going to be doing way more damage than your target. But for example, if you're a size modifier lower, then your agility is going to be dramatically increased because you're just going to be so much more agile. Talking about a Schrodinger's character here, you build them as you need them. The class system uses the pie system, which I really like. So it goes into multi-classing right at the beginning. So there's a number of different classes here. We have warriors, mystics, rogues, bards, and fools. And each of these, you can think of your characters having a pie chart built up of 4 pie pieces. At the beginning of the game, you're going to choose 3 pie pieces. These can all be from the same class, or you can mix and match. So you can do 2 from one, 1 from another, or 3 from 3 different classes. And this is going to continue all the way, and you're going to keep these 3 pie pieces up until 10th level, where you unlock your final pie piece. And if you choose all 4 the exact same, then you are going to unlock some special abilities. But a lot of people are going to want to mix and match because it's a lot of fun to do that. Down here, we can see how the different classes that you choose are going to affect the modifiers that you have. So warriors slowly improve combat, modified by agility. Mystics improve occult. Rogues improve stealth. Bards get better at presence. And fools get better at faith. So if you have, for example, all 3 of your initial pie pieces are the same, all 3 of your initial pie pieces are from the same class, then your modifiers per level are going to go up really quickly. If they're more spread out, it's not going to go up as fast because you really are just splitting up the points that you're getting. There are some rules for priests here, which in a previous edition was a separate class. However, that's been rolled into the mystic class here, so that's just compatibility. We get into warrior special stuff here, warrior powers. So you're going to be able to choose some of these. You'll be able to choose more if you choose more pie pieces. There are, 3, 4, 5. There's like 6 different abilities here. So every warrior is going to be different. Even if you choose 2 pure warriors where they have 3 pie pieces that are the same from the same class, they could be quite different from one another. Each one has a locked power, which you only get when you choose your 4th pie piece at level 10. It's like your capstone. And each of these classes gets their own personal item, which is trademarked in some way. So for a warrior, it could be like a magical weapon that slowly improves as you accomplish greater and greater feats. At the end of each session, you roll some dice to see if your special item improves. And this is going to be different for every class. So the Den of Thieves, they have lucky items. Again, they have 4 special powers. For example, their locked power is Professional. This power allows the rogue to become calm rather than on edge or reckless at the beginning of each round. That's a fun little mechanic that we're going to get into a little further on. One little complaint that I have while I was reading this is that I think the organization could be a little better. Generally, it's quite good in that it keeps to this control panel design where most topics are kept on a 1 or 2 page spreads. There's not a lot of flipping around. But on the other hand, there's a lot of forward references. So while you're reading it, you're often being referred to mechanics that have not been explained yet. This makes it kind of confusing. Although once you read the whole book, it all does fit together. But I think some rearranging of the order that it was written in could help with understanding. The wizard, so you can be a sage, a mystic, a pillar, which is more about protecting people. You can undo the work of other magicians. A thaumaturge, if you want to be more like a cleric, you're going to be able to do more miracles. Exorcists, warlocks, a lot of the typical D&D classes that you're familiar with, which are more varied than just these 5, can be replicated by choosing the right abilities here. The Ship of Fools. I like that there's a fool class. The fools are basically the type of character that is not really an adventurer. They've stumbled into the situation, into this adventuring party. They're not totally sure why they're here, but they're just going along for the ride. The main thing that fools have is they get way more luck than everyone else because the trickster gods are smiling down upon them. So that means that they're going to be able to survive a lot better than many other characters. The locked power at level 10 is they are the chosen one. You've been destined for some unknown purpose, so you're practically impossible to kill. You have so much luck. And bards. Bards are orators, they're diplomats. They really make use of the fact that this game has social combat and allows you to use mechanics to influence NPCs and take control of them, or to influence them in very dramatic ways. You can get henchmen because you can become more and more famous, and eventually you become an idol where people just follow you wherever they go. And you can take luck from the people that you have following you to help protect you. Character traits. So these are some more ways that you can customize your character a little bit. It does recommend that you can create your own traits. The main thing is that they should have an upside and a downside that are both going to come into play. If the player chooses a trait that they want that has no real downside or one that's not going to be part of the game, you should nix it. But usually it's a bonus in one situation and a penalty in another. So for example, you could be a barbarian. So what do you know of cultured ways, the guilt, the craft, and the lie? You may re-roll any health checks or rolls of the health die and choose the better result. You must re-roll any charisma checks or rolls of the charisma die and choose the worst result. So oftentimes it can be as simple as being better at one ability and worse at another. Skills and backgrounds are quite freeform. So you start off with quite a few skills. I believe it's your intelligence score. Yeah. So if your intelligence score is like 10, you get 10 skills. These are quite narrow. You can also choose backgrounds if you want. A background takes up 4 of these skills, and it's something like a blacksmith instead of blacksmithing. So by choosing something like blacksmith, not only can you work with metal, but you could do everything else that a blacksmith could do. So perhaps running a shop or shoeing horses or lifting heavy objects. You get some more nebulous. So in some ways, it's more, you get a lot of skills for the price of just 4. But it's all constrained within one particular set, if that makes sense. Skills can also be languages, and you can also get weapon skills. Weapon skills basically prevent you from taking penalties for using weapons that you're not good at. It is possible to improve your skills, but it says here that characters may attempt to gain a new skill for each season they spend training full-time, or a year for a background. So this tells you about the scale that this game is supposed to work at. This game could take place over years. It's not a typical D&D game where you're getting levels every few adventuring days. Instead, your characters are supposed to live over the course of years. This is for long-term campaigns. We have group templates here. So when you're making a new group, a new adventuring party, you can build connections between them. It says to just pick the character on your left and on your right and choose a relationship that you have with them. There's some examples here: family, protector, a bromance or romance, employee, higher calling, life debt, and of course there's plenty more that you could make up. These often give bonuses or incentives to one or both of the people involved. Starting equipment. So you have packages that you can start off with, but generally this can be generated on the fly via the Schrodinger's character situation, or the rule set that is used there. Character morality is really up to you. It has a law, chaos, and good and evil axis, but how you interpret that is, it's really up to the party, and it can affect the characters psychologically. So they're not forced to act according to their alignment, but it is going to affect them in a way. So if you have a very good character, you could still have him commit an evil act, but he's going to be racked with guilt. So that could play into the game. You are also going to choose a lucky number here, which can factor into combat. Something cool can happen. Just from 1 to 20, you just choose a number. And there's a few more bits and pieces here. So mana is like an energy source that you use to cast magic. Typically, magic, it drains your willpower. It creates stress. But if you are the right kind of wizard, you can get a pool of mana to help compensate for that. There's also piety points, which we'll look at later. Fate points, which can give you rerolls. And we have some information about how the different modifiers work. There's different types of conflicts. So combat, presence, and stealth are all types of conflicts where there are mechanics for that. All right, we have a section on adventuring. The basic system here is that you take 2 actions on your turn whenever you're in a combat or a debate or a stealth situation. They can be virtually anything, but there's a lot of tactics that go into that due to the initiative system, which we'll look at in a second. This is one of my favorite little systems right here. I've heard Zarkov talk about this, I think, on blog posts before. And basically, once you start off the game, you start off calm. And when you're calm, every thing that you try and roll for is going to be a 10. That's by default. You can add your modifiers to it, but that's what it is. It's a 10. However, if you want to get higher than a 10, because 10 is just not going to cut it, your character can move up to be on edge. And if you're on edge, then now you're rolling 3d6. So 3d6 is going to give you a bell curve, right? So it's typically going to be around 10, but you could get higher or lower numbers as well. So you move up when you want to, or if you spend luck points. Remember, luck is like hit points. So whenever you're taking damage in some way, you move up. But it's also, you can do it voluntarily. And then you can move up to reckless if you want to start rolling d20s, which of course has a flat distribution. So rolling a 1 is the same as rolling a 20. And that happens if you spend a fate point or if you want to move up. It's possible to move back down to calm again at the end of an adventure, or if you spend an extended stay in a peaceful and safe place. So if you're just out in the wilds or out in the dungeon for long periods of time, you're going to move up to reckless pretty quickly. But if you're very careful, you could stay more calm and controlled. It really depends on the way that you want to play it. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. I really like how that mechanically models the way that the character is acting, whether they're calm or reckless, and the panic that sets in as things get more and more dangerous. For your attribute checks here, the idea is that you're trying to hit a 20 to succeed. And what you'll be doing is not adding your modifier, you'll be adding your full-on ability score, or your attribute score, as I believe it is called here. So for example, if you have a strength attribute of 10 and you're calm, then you're going to be hitting 20s all day long. Of course, there could be situations that are more difficult that increase the target number from 20 to higher than 20, and then calm's not going to cut it anymore. You'll have to move up to being on edge, or perhaps change the situation somehow before you have a chance of succeeding. We also have saving throws, which work in a similar fashion. We have saving throw categories over here, which look at the different ways. They look at how likely it is for your saving throw to succeed. And that's going to have different effects based on, are you going to be able to avoid all of the effect or only part of the effect? There's a lot more granularity there than you typically see in D&D or OSR rule sets, which is kind of nice. All right, so damage and other accrued points. So each of your attributes here has a kind of track that goes along with it that can take damage. So for example, let's take strength. So if you had strength 10, then as you took damage from combat, for example, you would start crossing off these X's. Once you reached beyond halfway, something happens. In this case, for strength, you become incapacitated. When it fills up all the way, then you're dead. However, most of these tracks also have a secondary point that can be scored against it. In this case, it's damage and then stun. Stun is just a dash or a slash instead of an X. So it's like damage, but less. And the thing about these secondary points is that they can trigger this midpoint, so they can incapacitate you, but they can't kill you. So if all of these filled up with stun, then you wouldn't be dead. And if you received even more stun, they would just start turning into X's. So it's pretty granular. There's a lot of detail here that you'd have to track for each of your ability scores, but it's all done with a reason. So for example, we have will over here, and you can penalty per point. So as you're taking stress, that's your main type of point that affects will. It's going to decrease your resistance rolls. So there is a death spiral here with most of your attributes. As they start getting damaged, your character gets weaker and it gets harder for them to survive. The way that you mitigate this is by spending luck points. Luck, as I mentioned before, is like hit points. So if you take damage, or if you take mental damage, or if any of these other things try to hurt you, you can spend luck to negate it 1 for 1. And then once it runs out, then you're in trouble. You should probably try and regenerate your luck before you dash further into combat. It reminds me a little bit of the dichotomy between grit and flesh that we've seen in some other OSR rule sets, where grit is like this kind of ephemeral protective resource that gets regenerated a bit more quickly, where flesh is like the meat points, where if that hurts, then you're really down. So some of our other tracks include things like your health, or influence, or intoxication. So there's an actual system for drunkenness here. So if you're drinking too much, then this track will start filling up on your health meter, and you'll start feeling the effects of that. And there's rules for how it gets worn off. We have regaining health, luck, and mana. Things regenerate really slowly, so especially health. This speaks to the more realistic tone that the book has and the approach that it takes to adventuring, where if your character is seriously injured, then it could take them weeks or months to fully recover. So there's these long time scales involved. This really does encourage you to be running more than one character. You could have a character that's just in recovery somewhere, and you just pick up a new guy and start running with him instead. Luck regenerates very slowly. Typically, you're just going to roll 1d6 to see how much luck you have. And if it is higher than your current luck, then it's going to be your new luck score. And that's basically as high as it gets, 1d6. If you want to roll higher than that, then you're going to have to do this in a much safer, more relaxing, or opulent surroundings. So not in the wilderness, not at the bottom of the dungeon. In a case like that, you can roll a d6 for each of your levels and add all of those together. So if you were a 3rd level character, you could roll 3d6 and possibly get 18 luck. However, this is not going to regenerate back to 18 over the course of the adventure, because this is only going to fully have the capability of fully regenerating once you're in a safe location. So this is an interesting balance, because I like the fact that characters are a lot more vulnerable than they usually are in OSR games, but it still makes having higher levels a serious advantage. So if you're starting off on a new adventure, let's say you're starting from your home base, your characters are all fully rested. In a situation like that, high-level characters will have lots of luck. Low-level characters will have less. But over the course of the adventure, all of their luck scores are going to slowly tick downwards. So they have more of a buffer, but it's not like every morning you wake up with full hit points again, as you do in standard games. If you go to parties or celebrations, you can also regenerate luck pretty quickly. Dying while traveling. So again, there's a more realistic tone here. Traveling in the wild is dangerous. Depending on the type of terrain that you're in, you're going to be making health checks to see if you take damage that can't be negated by luck. So if you're in an inhospitable place, every 12 hours, you're going to be rolling again to see if you take damage. Whereas in a pleasant terrain, it's only once a week. So you can travel through open, pleasant terrain for long periods of time without really worrying about anything. But in a more dangerous environment, watch out. This really makes it so that you're going to have to plan your trips. You have to know, where are the roads? Where are the stopping points? Are there inns nearby? Where's the closest village? If you just head straight out into the wilds, you could have a really bad time. On the other hand, however, there's another fun rule about regaining mana, which is kind of the reverse, where the further away from civilization you are, the faster you regenerate mana. It doesn't regenerate for you in the city, but if you're out in the uncharted wilderness, you're going to get 5 of them per day. If you're in a mystical waste, it's going to be 1 per hour, and so on. So there's a balance there where wizards are going to want to wander far away from civilization to gain the full strength of their power, but that's going to put you in more and more physical danger. Some general advice for investigations, just a nice procedure here. So for example, if something you're trying to find is a secret, to gain the information, you have to do 2 of the following: interact with it with an action, investigate with a skill, or succeed in an attribute check. If it's hidden, you have to do 1 of the following. And if it's obvious, you have it automatically. So this just gives you a very clear, concrete structure for how to do investigations. Some rules for falling, panic, fire, the typical stuff that you're going to run into if you're on a fantasy adventure. And the rules for size categories. As you move up in size categories, as I mentioned before, you do way more damage, but your agility is far less effective. The mechanics of conflict. So the big thing to talk about here is initiative. So everyone has an initiative die that is going to be based on your agility. And everyone rolls it every round in combat. And the number that you roll on your die is going to tell you the order that you go in. So if you have a lot of agility, you'll be rolling a bigger die, so the odds of rolling a higher number. Now, you actually want your number to be high. And the reason for this is that you start with player 1, they go first, player 2 goes second, and so on. You just move, you count up. But if your initiative number is higher, then you're allowed to interrupt lower people at any time. So what this does is if you have a high initiative number, you're not really going last. Really what you're getting is the opportunity to go at any time that you want after you see how lower initiative people are going to act. So there's a lot of tactics that play into this. So you really have to gauge when you're going to act and when is the right time to interrupt. We have the different types of actions. Defending yourself is a really important one. So for example, if you aren't able to defend yourself in combat unless you have an action free to do that. So you could try an attacking twice or moving twice, but then you're just totally defenseless. You can't defend yourself. So if you have a high initiative character that is sitting in the background and isn't acting yet and is just waiting, that's going to cause everyone with a lower initiative to reserve an action because they may need to defend themselves if that person jumps in. So there's a lot of mind games that you can play here with this interrupt system, which I really like. It's definitely slower than you typically see, where in a lot of OSR games, it's just side-based initiative. So the whole side goes and then the other side just goes. Really straightforward. But this adds a lot of tactics and a lot of thinkiness to combat, which is a nice change. You can shift positions, you can jump in front of other people to try and take damage for them, and the rules for resolving opposed rolls, because if you have the defending yourself ability, you can actually do an opposed roll to try and stop yourself from taking damage. Armor does reduce the damage that you take, and helmets can help reduce the critical hits that you take. If you have more than one success, you can possibly pull off bigger and bigger feats. So you can get extra successes by succeeding at a higher thresholds, by rolling higher or much higher than your opponent is in these contested rolls. Lucky numbers, as we said before, when you're creating a character, you can choose a lucky number from 1 through 20, so that in combat, if this number comes up, then it can give you special stuff. Like you can get an opportunity attack, or if you're doing a social combat, you can launch an insult at them, which can distract them and give you some luck back, things like that. Areas are more abstract, so we just have zones of combat that you're moving through. And of course, we have a section on common sense. There are mechanics for all of these things. It is a pretty, mechanically oriented game, but it just points out, don't take the mechanics to override what the world is saying, right? If you're in a bright hallway and a guard is looking straight at you, you cannot sneak up on him. That just doesn't make sense. So the world comes first. There's a system here for light and shadow, where the amount of darkness that you're in is rated from 0 to -10, where -10 is the darkest, and that's going to affect modifiers for all sorts of things. So the further you are away from a light source, the darker that you are, the darker the situation is, and the harder it is to act. So this is going to make the type of light source that you're carrying really important. If you're carrying a dim light source, then people, if they move even just a little bit away from you, are going to have a really hard time doing anything, especially if there's monsters that can see in the dark. Quick section on equipment here. I really like how the money system is basically based on dollars, and he encourages you to think that way, because it's really hard for the modern mind to interpret money back into pennies and silver coins and gold coins. So he says just think of it like dollars. So a copper coin is like $1. White copper is $5. Silver coin is $15. And gold coin is about $300. So if you think of you want to buy a horse, well, that's like buying a nice car. About how much would that cost? If you want to buy a long sword, that's kind of like buying an assault rifle. That allows you to sort of put things in context a little bit more and speed up the whole monetary process. We have an encumbrance system, which is really important. It uses dots. It's basically like slots. It's based on your ability scores. I believe your strength, your strength score is the number of dots that you can carry. We have some examples over here of how that would work out. And there's systems for carrying capacity with different containers. So if you could have a container that takes up 4 dots but can hold 8, just because if you organize the stuff in there, it's more efficient to carry. And you can even put containers inside containers. I like that all of this is spelled out for players who really like to pack their stuff and to be efficient in that way, if that's something you want to focus on. Our basic types of armor and helmets. And weapons are pretty straightforward. Small do D4, medium do D6, large do D8. It doesn't actually spell out which weapons are which, although I guess you could, that's going to depend on your campaign, so you can pretty easily figure that out for yourself. We have a section on magic here. As I said, magic drains your, it gives stress is the term for the type of damage that is inflicted on your will, which slowly drains over time, although mana can mitigate that. You can spend mana to do that instead. So this isn't a really a Vancian system. It's more just about managing how much resource damage that you're taking. Rules for counterspells, which takes a long time. You have to know the type of magic that has been cast before you can use it and counteract the spells. You can also put counterspells on wards, sort of like delaying them to protect people in the future. Rules for researching spells and making new spells. There really isn't a grimoire exactly. Instead, he shows you how to put together several different types of aspects of spells to create your own. So first we have delivery, for example, like a bolt. So the difficulty is 2 per power level, right? That's how much damage it's going to cost you, or how much it's going to drain you. It has a range, it has a basic description here, and then you would combine that with an effect. And there's 36 of these. You could roll these on 2d6. So 1, 2 means you roll a 1 on one d6 and a 2 on the other d6. And so you could have combined 2 of these. So bolt combined with charm. So it's like a bolt that charms someone. And that's going to add an additional cost. And it has all of your basic magical effects. Of course, you can quite easily make up your own or port yours in from other games. And there's little kickers that you can optionally put in as well. So it could cause a blast, or it might be unstable or crude in some way. We have a section on casting holy magic or miracles. There really isn't a cleric type class as such. Fools are a little bit like that. They can gain more faith than other people. But if you want to be a cleric, you really have to buy into the world, and you have to act like a cleric in the fantasy world. This means finding a deity and devoting yourself to them and then doing stuff for them. By doing stuff, these types of tasks, you're going to gain piety, and you'll spend that piety as points to try and accomplish miracles. So this could range from preaching to a congregation for a week, 1 piety for you. Convert an entire region, you could get up to 1,000 piety, I suppose, depending on the size of the region. So once you gain this piety, then you can spend it on things like the armor of faith or authority, binding a familiar to yourself. If you manage to accumulate 500 piety, then you enter what's called the state of grace, and you get a whole bunch of cool aspects. You become like a living saint in some ways, which is really fun. I like how this isn't an actual class. Clerics are always troublesome in any game, and just by taking this out of it being a class and being something that you do in the world, I think that solves a lot of the problems. Because so many people are a cleric, but then they don't act like clerics. This forces you to act like one if you want to gain those privileges. So you're always on holy ground if you're in a state of grace or if you're a saint. You're always blessed and you can't be cursed. Your bodies don't decay upon death. You become incorruptible. You count as a supernatural being and cannot be possessed. You can gain relics when rolling 2d6 at the end of each session, which is like a special, item. You can intuitively sense when you're on unholy ground. Lots of great stuff. So that would be a fun goal for a character to choose for themselves. I just want to become a saint, man. That's what I'm going to do. Lots of different miracles you can call out here that range anywhere from just like 1 piety up to like hundreds of piety. If you want to cause like a calamity, that's going to cost 200 piety right there. And we have a section for what you do at the end of each session. There's a little bit that reminds me of Burning Wheel in some way, where at the end of each session, you're really going to wrap things up and you're going to gain XP, but you're also going to like nominate the best player and you're going to see if your character improves in a lot of ways. So there's two different kinds of points here. We have your fate points, which are kind of like re-rolls, and destiny points, which are really powerful. It recommends that you give it to players on their birthdays. There's a lot of really tongue-in-cheek humor all throughout this book, which is a lot of fun. In some ways, I think some of the descriptions could be a bit tighter. Sometimes it's very loose and casual, which makes it easy to read, but not always super clear on the mechanics. So I think that's a point of improvement. But overall, it is actually a really fun read in the way that it doesn't take role-playing too seriously while still giving you lots of tools to run a very mechanically tight game if you choose to. So getting a destiny point is really powerful. For example, you can get it and spend it to do something like Sic Semper Tyrannis, where this option allows for the kind of inglorious anticlimactic death of a character that you rarely see. It disallows an opponent from using luck points to soak the damage or other accrued points from an attack. So you could just sneak up on the evil king, stab him, and boom, he's dead. Rolling for Awesomeness is one other cool little mini game that you do at the end of each session. Basically, each character has an awesomeness score, which is based on the amount of danger that they willingly threw themselves into and how cool they were over the course of the session. And if you have a high enough awesomeness score, you can possibly roll against it. And if you roll under it, you can get some fate points, which will help you do rerolls later on in the campaign. I'm usually not a huge fan of meta currencies like fate points, but it's really not too offensive. You can really think of it as the gods smiling upon you and giving you benefits, but of course it's optional, easy to put in or take out. Some of the possible awesomeness benefits that you can get here are +1 for wearing a cape, +1 for wearing an awesome hat or a manly beard or an 80s hair. Basically, you can just try and be Kurt Russell. Wearing an eye patch. +5 if they actually need it, +5 if the MVP, people vote on the most valuable player for the game. And of course, you can change these to be whatever you want. Something that fits with the theme of your campaign, perhaps. Experience points and levels, we have our XP system right here, where basically the main thing that happens is that as your levels go up, you're going to get more luck. That's probably the biggest benefit that you're going to be getting. And there's also these milestone breaks here. The first milestone is just, becoming a hero, doing your first adventure. This one is you have to accomplish something really significant. So to reach 5th level, characters must reach another milestone for performing exceptional deeds. There are things like slaying a dragon, collapsing a barony or kingdom with powerful spells, or converting a province or region to your faith. So you have to do something big or you just don't get into 5th level. And then if you want to reach level 10, you have to save the world. Or destroy the world, some massive feat that the whole multiverse will wake up and take notice of. So it's really hard to reach level 10. Most players are never going to get that high. This is a game, as I mentioned before, that is based on long-term campaigns and on getting really invested into the world. If you want to become this sort of epic character that the fates will sing about for years to come, you really got to put the work in. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can get XP here. It's not strictly gold or XP for gold, as you typically see in old school games. So traveling. If you're traveling through different types of terrain, you can get XP just for the journey. You're going through an inhospitable area, you're going to get 100 XP per week. Also, intelligence can affect your XP gain. So a really smart character will level up faster. Exploration, so if you actually reach unusual destinations as goals, that can give you even more XP. So go somewhere that's been unseen for years, 1,500. Defeating minions, you get a little bit of XP that way. I love the rules for dungeons here. So this is a really nice and simple rule that basically anyone could steal. If you're exploring a dungeon, he recommends that you get 10 XP cumulatively per room that you explore. So the first one that you go into, that's 10 XP. The next room, 20. The next one, 30, the next one, 40 XP, and so on. So this encourages you to push further and further and say, just one more room, but you're going deeper and deeper into a more dangerous place. So you'll have that push and pull of wanting to go a little bit further, but also realizing that you're running out of luck. Your characters are getting worn down and you could die at any minute. It's a great little mechanic. I love it. Vanquishing villains. This game really does encourage you to make villains flee, where you get exactly as much XP, or if you manage to capture them, you get even more. So if you kill someone, you get 10% of their XP. If you capture them, you get 25%. Capturing's a lot harder, and it's something that characters just don't do very often in D&D, so it's nice to see it incentivized right there. Slaying monsters based on the size and the danger of the monster. It tells you how much XP that you're going to get. So this encourages you to really go after the big dogs, right? If something's a national threat or a regional threat, you're going to really want to focus on that rather than wandering around and just killing kobolds over and over. Although I guess you could if you wanted to. Treasure. Of course, traditional games tend to have XP for treasure, but what this does is it doesn't just do every gold piece. It's a little bit like with the monsters or with the finding lost locations. You have to have a goal. It needs to be an important treasure that is well known. So a national treasure, a cultural icon, mythological in nature, those are the big scores that you're going to want to go for. You can also get a little bit of XP for puzzles, traps, and riddles. At the very end of a session, you roll the 2d6, and you only roll it one time. And the roll that comes out determines which characters get to improve their special items. And each class talks a little bit about how that works. End of the campaign talks a little bit about retiring and how you can have characters that get to level 10 and are just sort of fading out of the campaign and get replaced by new characters that you want to play. But there's also rules for how they can come back out of retirement. So if people gang up to fight this legendary hero, you can come out of retirement and fight them and then retreat back again. It's a nice little touch. So overall, it's a great little package of unusual and really well thought out rules that you probably haven't seen before. Even if you're not going to use the whole system, there's a lot of things to take here. I love that rule about dungeons. I love the rule with the calm and the on edge and the reckless, where that determines what type of dice that you roll. So you can control what your bell curve is like. There's just a lot of things like that that are really nice for stealing. This is the basic rule book. There is going to be an advanced rule book later on this year that's going to add even more rules and flesh things out further. So keep an eye out for that. I'll put links down in the description below for where you can check this out for yourself. It should be on Kickstarter now or very soon. And thank you for watching. A big shout out today is going to go out to a lot of my new patrons over on Patreon. And those are Sage McLaughlin, Leah Collins, Logan Potts, 3C273, Mun Cow. And if this is the same Mun Cow that does the art for Thousand Islands, rock on, man. Your art is fantastic. Jim Reeder, Dow, David York, Dave, Limithron, Leslie Stowe, General Kenobi, Erich Tolbert, Luke Magnan, Jorge Jacques Danton, Spout Morin, Jake Mix, 3 Jack Pete, and AMG. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Sorry if I messed up your names, but I really appreciate all that you do to help support Questing Beast and keep this whole operation going. All right, thanks to all of you, and thank you for watching. I will see you next time.